All right. Welcome to Indy Xamarin. Super excited to have everyone here. This is going to be a great presentation. Just for those of you that are new, welcome. For those of you that are returning, welcome back. Excited to have you. For those of you that are new, we're on the fourth Wednesday of every month. And if you miss any part of our presentations, you can simply watch the recording. We tend to post the link to it on the Meetup site. For those of you that are joining from the .NET .NET Virtual User Group? I think that's what it's called. Welcome as well. Very excited. And our sponsors tonight, Sandy Solutions, Launch Fishers, mFractor, and RevDebug. Oh, something got really loud for a moment. So Sandy is our primary sponsor, great consulting firm here in Indiana. Launch Fishers, if we were meeting in person, we'd be over there. And mFractor and RevDebug, great tools. If you don't have them, you should have them. Yay. RevDebug is free, mFractor is not. Tonight, we've got Brandon. Welcome, Brandon. Yay, Brandon Minnick. He's going to talk about the future of Xamarin. Super excited for his presentation. Always enjoy it when Brandon's presenting. We are also brought to you by the .NET Foundation, not the .now Foundation. That's probably something else. The .NET Foundation. And also the .NET Foundation Virtual User Group. Really cool virtual user group. Basically all the .NET user groups around the globe brought together in one place. Great idea. Love it. Love it. All right. So, Brandon, I'm super excited for your presentation. Go ahead and present and take it away.
Sounds good. All right. Let's go ahead and bring up some slides. So, yeah, thanks for having me tonight, Ari. It's always a pleasure. Like Ari said, my name's Brandon Minnick. I work at Microsoft as a developer advocate, mostly focusing on Xamarin, mobile, .NET, Azure, cloud stuff. And yeah, tonight we'll just be talking about the future of Xamarin. Before we get going, though, there's a couple slides you'll see, or a couple links you'll see on the bottom of the slides. Over here on the left, this is my Twitter handle. Feel free to shoot me a message anytime if you have questions on Xamarin or Azure or .NET. Always happy to chat about that kind of stuff. My direct messages are open if you ever want to shoot me a message, or maybe you have a question tonight that we didn't get around to answering. No problem. Feel free to hit me up there. And on the bottom right is a landing page that I put together for our session tonight. So this is where you can find all the stuff we're covering. We're going to check out some code, some samples. There's some YouTube videos I recommend. There's some blog posts I recommend. And all of those are on that website. So if you go to codetraveler.io/Indy-MAUI, then you can find it all. You don't have to worry about memorizing anything, taking any screenshots. You can just follow the link. So pretty much we're going to be talking about .NET MAUI all night, because that is the future of Xamarin. If you haven't heard of it yet, .NET MAUI was announced almost a year ago. I think we announced it at Build 2020, so that would have been back in March. And it's an acronym that stands for Multi-Application User Interface. And what's happening is basically Xamarin Forms is taking over Microsoft as the de facto UI for all .NET. So let's show off kind of what I mean by this. And this is by no means the official architecture, but this is the most helpful way I've been able to understand .NET MAUI and describe it to other folks as well. And it's that .NET MAUI is essentially an interface layer between your framework, so the code you're writing, and the platform that displays that UI. And so like I said, you'll probably not see this from official Microsoft presentations, but this really is what's happening with .NET MAUI. Yes, Xamarin Forms exists today, but if you want to leverage Xamarin Forms, like there are already existing tool sets like Mobile Blazor bindings, like Uno, that leverage Xamarin Forms, but they have to hook into the Xamarin Forms framework. And really all that does is clog up the system. It slows things down because at the end of the day, what are these frameworks doing? They're putting UI on the screen. They're drawing a button on the center of the screen. And so what .NET MAUI does is essentially, and it calls these handlers. If you're familiar with Xamarin Forms, you've probably heard of Xamarin Forms renderers. .NET MAUI handlers, same idea, slightly different. We'll see what all that looks like in code in a little bit. But .NET MAUI is essentially just a suite of interfaces. So if you want to create a button, you just implement the iButton interface provided by .NET MAUI. And then .NET MAUI knows how to handle those interface methods, properties to then render that button for iOS and render that button on Android. So .NET MAUI is basically this new translation layer. And with it, we're going to get really awesome performance improvements. We're going to get really awesome, we'll say, ease of coding improvements. And on top of that, we're also going to get a suite of new frameworks. So the reason I mentioned that this isn't an official Microsoft slide by any means is that I put Xamarin Forms here on the top because that's what we're familiar with today, right? The like the Xamarin Forms button, the Xamarin Forms label, the Xamarin Forms picker, and the layouts and using grids. All that stuff lives in Xamarin Forms along with the rendering engine. But really, those two can be broken apart, and that's kind of where .NET MAUI comes in. So that rendering engine is breaking out into .NET MAUI. We're calling that the handler. Xamarin Forms will probably not be called Xamarin Forms anymore. It'll probably be also adopt the .NET MAUI name, although I would like to see it still called Xamarin Forms, but doubtful that that'll happen. But the reason I bring that up is because now platforms like Xamarin Forms can just provide the framework. So Xamarin Forms, what's it do? It allows you to create UI using C# or XAML. It allows you to architect your apps using MVVM or even reactive UI. And then it just passes that off to the platform. So in this case, it's going down through .NET MAUI and getting translated into the UI button on iOS or the Android widget button on Android. And what's cool about this is with other frameworks, like maybe you've heard of Comet. We'll be checking this out and showing it off a little bit later tonight. Comet is an MVU framework, a model view update framework that allows you to create your apps using Xamarin, but with the model view update paradigm, which is certainly exciting. It's something that I'm a big fan of. It's MVU. If you haven't heard of it, we are behind in the .NET community. .NET's still very much locked into MVVM, and this is the best way to do everything is MVVM. Whereas the rest of the developer world, React, Flutter, they're all using MVU. So millions of developers are already using the MVU architecture. They found out that it's a better way to do things for mobile. And so Comet is going to open up a lot of doors and allow us to do that for our Xamarin apps. There's also an experimental tool called Mobile Blazor Bindings. I should also mention Comet's also experimental right now as well. Mobile Blazor Bindings. If you've ever built an app using Blazor, or maybe I should define Blazor. Blazor is a way to build web apps. So build websites. The kind of the killer feature with Blazor is it supports WASM WebAssembly, which means that it can run as a progressive web app. So what does that mean for mobile? Well, if you wrote an app in Blazor, you could install it on your phone as a PWA, a progressive web app, without having to go through the App Store. But that's a whole different rabbit hole. Mobile Blazor bindings is just using that Blazor syntax the same syntax you would use to make your Blazor website, bringing that syntax into mobile and then producing a native iOS and Android app, just like Xamarin Forms does, but using the Blazor syntax. And then, of course, there's other tools out there like Uno. Uno is its own separate company, separate entity that leverages Xamarin to create a cross-platform UI experience, and it's a great tool. But part of their problem is to do a lot of these things, they have to hook into Xamarin Forms. There's a lot of bloat. There's a lot of overhead there. So hopefully .NET MAUI will be able to streamline this translation layer between your UI framework and the platform. So hopefully, what I'm hoping to see is we'll just have this almost renaissance of .NET UI frameworks that come around. Because, like I said, if you to hook into MAUI, it's just a bunch of interfaces. So you implement iButton, and then .NET MAUI will handle the rest. You implement iLabel, .NET MAUI will handle the rest. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time to create a UI button or a UI label or whatever the platform equivalent is of what we're trying to do in our cross-platform UI code. So I mentioned that we're going to see a lot of performance improvements. Oh, I didn't even talk about timelines. .NET MAUI is scheduled for .NET 6. .NET 6 will be official stable release. That'll be later this November. So November 2021 is the timeline we're talking. So this is all mostly just good stuff to know for now, but there's not really any rush to jump into .NET MAUI and implement it today. Well, you can't implement it today because .NET 6 doesn't exist yet. And so ipso facto, .NET MAUI doesn't exist yet. But we should start seeing .NET 6 previews soon. So we'll see how timelines go. Preview timelines are always very flexible and fluid, but I'm hoping in February we'll probably see a .NET 6 preview 1. But .NET MAUI probably won't be fully fleshed out in preview 1, probably towards the later previews when we'll really start to play with or really start to get .NET MAUI in earnest into .NET 6. So timeline-wise, everybody that's here hanging out with us tonight, don't worry about jumping into your code and changing anything yet. But just by being here, you're now aware of these changes that are coming and probably will be able to lead these efforts for your team come November when all the code releases. But anyways, back to the slide. Slim renderers. These are basically how .NET MAUI is going to give us these performance improvements. And again, we're going to jump into code. So if a lot of the words I'm using, the lingo I'm using don't make sense, that's okay. We'll see the actual implementation of all this in a little bit. Excuse me. So with Xamarin Forms, I had this concept of renderers. Renderers can only be made in platform-specific code, so you had to be in the iOS project to do an iOS button renderer, and you had to be in the Android project to do an Android button renderer. And that it was, we'll say, great idea at the time. Very novel way of constructing, architecting Xamarin Forms, but what it ended up doing was a couple things. The first being renderers made it really hard for us, the developers, to create our own custom controls. To create custom controls, we had to create custom renderers. Even if it was just something simple like, I know I've done this for the UI pickers. So the Xamarin Forms picker, if I just want to center the text in it, well, I have to create a new file in my iOS project that's a custom renderer that expands on the picker renderer, and then I just add one line of code, it takes one line of code to center the text on the picker, but to do it was all this overhead of creating a new file, going into on element property changed or whatever the syntax is, remembering the syntax, and then if you've ever done this, you know at the top of your renderer, you have to add this assembly attribute. And that assembly attribute is what tells Xamarin Forms to use your renderer instead of its renderer. And so the first problem was we had to create these renderers on our own. Lots of overhead to do it. We couldn't do it in our cross-platform code. But the second problem was that assembly attribute caused huge performance impacts on our apps. So when Xamarin Forms is launching, when your app is launching on the device, it's having to do all this assembly scanning to see, are there any new assembly attributes here? Let's apply them here. And, not that takes minutes, not that it necessarily takes seconds, but those milliseconds add up. And we found that just by getting rid of that architecture and no longer relying on that assembly attribute, then we could shave a whole third of the previous startup time. So again, no promises. Every app is different. And when you upgrade to .NET MAUI, you'll have to also upgrade your renderers. But once you do, you should just see an immediate performance improvement because of just the way reflection works in .NET with these assembly attributes and assembly scanning. So in .NET MAUI, everything's an interface. You'll see this is MAUI.iView, iButton, and all of these button renderers. Actually, this is an old slide. They're now called handlers in MAUI. So Xamarin Forms had renderers. .NET MAUI has handlers. And those are all going to be inheriting from these interfaces and really just implementing the interface. So really cool stuff there. With .NET MAUI, we're going to also improve the command line experience. I don't know if anybody's tried to use the .NET command line to build an app. I was chatting with Ari about it before we kicked off the meetup tonight. But yeah, if you say, let's say you just made a .NET console app. So you use .NET Core 3.1, or maybe you're on .NET 5, and you have a console app, right? Well, on the command line, you can say .NET build, and that will build the console app. And you can say .NET run, and that'll run the console app. And that's true for the console apps. It's true for ASP.NET web apps, or ASP.NET Core, I guess, if you're still haven't upgraded to .NET 5 yet. Basically, all these .NET tools could use the .NET CLI, except for Xamarin. And there's a lot of history. There's a lot of interweaving parts into why, but long story short is Xamarin builds still, as of today, before .NET 6 comes out, as of today, still rely on MS Build for the for building the app, and specifically it relies on Mono's implementation of MS Build. And so the reason you can't just say .NET build on your Xamarin apps is because .NET doesn't know anything about Mono, or that .NET CLI, I should say, doesn't know anything about Mono. It doesn't know how to handle all this stuff. But if you've been watching any of the .NET GitHub repos, or maybe you were listening in at talks at Build or Ignite recently, we are merging Mono with .NET, well, what's previously known as .NET Core, now just called .NET. And so with .NET 6, we'll actually have this almost complete .NET SDK, I guess you can call it. And so, yeah, what we want to do with that, with now that those abilities exist, or now that that merger exists between .NET Core and Mono into .NET 5, .NET 6, we'll be able to take advantage of this for Xamarin. So we'll be able to say .NET new MAUI, and that's how we can generate a new MAUI app or new iOS, or at least something like this. Don't hold me to the fire for this exact syntax, because again, .NET 6 hasn't come out yet. These are just what we're thinking about. But so we'll get a much better CLI experience. And hopefully that'll help us. I don't know if you heard me and Ari complaining about App Center and why the builds are breaking, because, well, all this stuff hasn't been merged in yet. And .NET 6 should really streamline a lot of this. The other thing that's cool is in .NET MAUI, we're we're pushing for this multi-platform. Well, I'm sorry, multi-platform app UI is what it's called. I think the next slide. There we go. And let's just bring all this up. We're pushing for these single multi-targeted projects. Multi-targeted projects have been a thing in .NET for a couple of years now, albeit they haven't really made their way to the Xamarin world. And usually, or the only place I've seen multi-targeted projects in the Xamarin world is for libraries. So, for example, if you were to ever look at the source code for Xamarin Essentials uses a multi-targeted project. And what does that mean? Well, that means that there's only one project for your solution. So there's no more .NET Standard library and a Xamarin iOS library and a Xamarin Android library, or I should say project. So you don't have 3 projects in your solution. You just have the one project. And in your CS proj here, you tell it what target frameworks. So in this case, we're telling it like we have an iOS, a Android, and a .NET 5 project that we're targeting. And then the compiler just handles the rest. So when you build for iOS, like for example, here on the right, when we say build for David's iPhone, that knows make an iOS build, and that'll basically compile all the bits in this single project and create the iOS binary for us. And likewise, we say to build for Android, it'll build the Android APK or the Android app bundle. And what's really neat with this is that we can actually include platform-specific code here in our single project just by using the file extension names plus some magic in the compiler. So here we have a file called bluetoothdapter.android.cs. Well, the compiler knows that if I'm building for iOS, I'm going to ignore this file. But if I'm building for Android, I'm going to include this file. And so this way we don't have to create all these different projects. We don't have to have all these weird dependencies. It makes things like inversion of control a lot easier, and really just lowers the, or maybe shorten is a better word, the learning curve for Xamarin. Because right now, being a Xamarin developer is really hard because you have to know mobile. You have to understand iOS and Android, which both have, oh gosh, I think there are over 3,000 APIs each on both those platforms. So you have to understand both iOS and Android. You have to understand the application lifecycle. You have to understand how memory management and CPU limitations, battery limitations, Wi-Fi, internet limitations, how all that works on mobile, just like any other mobile developer in the world has to know. Like, for example, if we were building Objective-C or an iOS app in Objective-C, we'd have to know all those things as well. So we don't get to ignore those things as Xamarin developers. We have to know those too. But then on top of that, we have to understand this .NET ecosystem. We have to understand things like dependency injection, inversion of control, async await. There's all these layers of required knowledge to become become fluent in Xamarin. And a lot of those barriers will be shattered by the multi-targeted project. So we'll say stay tuned for a lot of this, but this is really exciting. I'll show you some examples of how multi-targeted projects make our lives so much easier, especially combined with .NET MAUI. It really is just a beautiful scenario where we no longer have to use service locators or dependency injection to jump back and forth between projects. So what else? Well, we mentioned the .NET command line stuff. When that happens, then we'll be able to better support VS Code. .NET 6 will be the first, we'll say, version of, how do I put this? In .NET 6, Xamarin will have like the first kind of baby support for VS Code. I don't know if anybody here has tried to build their apps, their Xamarin apps in Visual Studio Code instead of Visual Studio or Visual Studio for Mac. But it's not a pleasant experience. VS Code's a great tool. Don't get me wrong. I use VS Code all the time. Like if I'm If I'm writing Markdown or if I just want to quickly edit a file, great, love it. I install my C# extension. I get all the goodies. But when you're working on Xamarin apps in VS Code and you go to build them, it just doesn't work. And again, that kind of goes back to Xamarin requires Mono. Mono needs to use MS build. We can't use .NET build, blah, blah, blah. All those problems that are kind of getting solved into in .NET 6 will also allow us to move forward on supporting VS Code. So right now I'm just saying better support for VS Code. If you want to, once .NET 6 comes out with .NET MAUI, absolutely, you can give it a shot. It's still not going to be as pleasant of an experience as Visual Studio because like Visual Studio just works. It knows how to handle Xamarin stuff. I can just click build and the simulator pops up and you get your XAML hot reload and everything just works beautifully. But and I say I'm not one of the smart engineers that are working on this. They're way smarter than me. The smart engineers at Microsoft have put a ton of work that will essentially open the gate to allow us to fully support VS Code one day for Xamarin development, which would be amazing. C# hot reload. This is another thing that we can look forward to in we'll say .NET 6 / .NET MAUI. It's not going to be totally complete, but if anybody is like me and does not use XAML, I don't use XAML for any of my apps. Actually, I think the last time we hung out, Ari, or is it going to be the next time? I will be either did or will be presenting a whole session on just creating Xamarin apps in C# without any XAML. And so, yeah, if you're like me and you only use C#, you don't use XAML, you have been very jealous of the XAML world because they have XAML hot reload. Well, soon we'll be getting C# hot reload. And again, this was a massive effort. So just like the .NET CLI support, there's a lot of things that had to happen for C# hot reload to work. Mainly the fact that C# is ahead of time compiled. The way XAML hot reload was able to reach fruition is because XAML is interpreted at runtime. So for us to change our XAML code while the app is running in debug mode, well, and I'm not saying it was easy to implement. It was definitely not easy to implement XAML hot reload, but XAML already is an interpreted language. So just to essentially pull the code again to see, oh, the XAML changed, let's reinterpret it at runtime, no problem. With C#, C#'s ahead of time compiled. So that means you have to compile the entire app, run it, and then you can't change anything because it's all down in the native binary, right? It's all compiled code. So for C# hot reload support, the team literally had to invent a Mono interpreter. So they had to take Mono that had been ahead of time compiled for, oh gosh, Mono is probably close to 20 years old now. And they had to build it from the ground up to be an interpreter. So all that work's going on right now. I'm not sure where the C# hot reload support will land, but it is coming. And again, all this stuff's open source, so you can always dig into the Xamarin repos on GitHub and check it out. But I know I'm really excited because, like I said, I make all my apps in C#, and I would love to just see my UI change in real time, like my friends that write in XAML. All right, and the last one, model view update architecture. Like I said, this won't be necessarily specific to .NET MAUI, but .NET MAUI opens the door to tools like Comet, which we'll check out later, that is a framework that runs on .NET MAUI that natively supports the MVU architecture. And I can't say enough about how great MVU is. Like I said, millions of developers around the world use it. It's kind of the de facto, or is the de facto architecture for your Flutter apps, your React apps. And then if anybody came to the GraphQL talk I did, I think that was last month, you can even basically use GraphQL for your backend of your MVU app. And what that means is, if we kind of translate this to MVVM, your GraphQL backend would be like your view model. So anytime your backend updates, your UI just updates or gets the update. It's a really cool tight model view update loop. We'll jump into some code in just a bit. But next up is our .NET MAUI deep dive. But I know I've been throwing a lot of stuff at you for a while now. So let me pause and see what questions you have. I'm going to pull up the chat here, see if there's anything I missed in the chat, or feel free to raise your hand, unmute your mic. We'll open up the floor for a couple minutes here before jumping in any code. Danny.
So with the MAUI and getting away from like the traditional PCL, Android project, your platform projects, for existing applications we have written, what is the like to convert that project over to MAUI? It looks like it's going to be a pretty significant undertaking to do that. Is that going to be the case to convert all that code?
Good question. I'm glad you brought that up. So the goal of the Xamarin team is you won't have to touch any code if you wanted to. So I guess the quick answer is no, you don't have to use the single project format. You can still use the same architecture with the multiple projects, your .NET Standard project. Hopefully you're not using PCLs anymore, Danny. We got rid of those a couple of years ago, and hopefully you're all on .NET Standard now. But yeah, if you want to keep that same architecture,
we are, yeah.
Good to hear. Yeah. But yeah, if you want to keep that same architecture, that's totally cool, because this is just this multi-targeted frameworks. That's just a .NET thing. So it's like a goodie that you can take advantage of, but you don't have to. And so the plan, and we're getting really close. I've seen some examples, but yeah, the plan is you should be able to just update to .NET MAUI. So basically remove Xamarin Forms from your project, install .NET 6, and there's going to even be, if you have a couple custom renderers from Xamarin Forms, the team is making essentially a shim that will bring that into .NET MAUI. So it'll just work. So yeah, the goal is you won't have to change any of your code. In the perfect world, yeah, you just basically install the .NET 6 SDK and everything just works. I'm sure there's going to be some crazy edge cases, so I don't want to make any promises that says, yeah, don't worry about ever having to change a bit of code. But yeah, for updating .NET MAUI, it should just be as simple as installing the SDK. You will have this custom renderer shim, but the downside there is, like we were talking about earlier, custom renders are slow because of that assembly scanning. So that assembly attribute that's on the top of the code. And so if you want to get that performance improvement for free from .NET MAUI, then you would want to change your Xamarin Forms custom renderer to basically leverage the .NET MAUI, not renders, handlers. There we go. But basically bring those into .NET MAUI. But hopefully it should be really painless. And like I said, that's the goal. So
so we
do you
can't
have
still
to do any of
use the
this?
old. We can't still use the existing renders if we want to. Those aren't going to go obsolete day one.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends how you define obsolete. I would say they are going to be obsolete, but kind of the same way like something in .NET when it's marked obsolete, you just get a little warning, but it still works. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, they'll still work, but I know me personally, I'm going to go through all of my Xamarin Forms apps and port those over to .NET MAUI almost probably first thing I do, just because you'll get an instant performance boost from, we'll say, foregoing all that reflections that happens with Xamarin Forms. So it should be pretty easy. It should be pretty painless. If it's not, then blow us up. That's the goal of the team. So if there's something that the team missed, then loop us in, let us know how we can help, because if you're experiencing a problem with the upgrade, then likely somebody else is. But fingers crossed should be pretty painless.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Krishna.
Hey, Brendan. So I have two questions. One, is there any effect on the memory size? Say the current Xamarin Forms takes a lot of space. So with the MAUI, is there any effect on that? Second one is like with the continuous integration, is there an effect once we install the MAUI?
Yeah. So for the first question, we say size. Do you mean the memory usage or the like the app size, the APK size?
APK size or IPA, yeah.
Okay. I haven't seen the latest numbers. I know the team was hoping to that those will get reduced, but I'm not sure what the latest updates are. I mean, the way everything's architected, it should be reduced, but I don't want to make any promises. So I'll say for number one, I don't know, but just based off of, and we'll see the source code for MAUI in a bit. It is slimmer. I mean, they're called slim renderers, right? So it should make everything a little smaller. And yeah, with CI, I'm thinking it's going to make everything easier because right now, what's tough with Xamarin and CI is that your CI tools really have to know Xamarin. Like we were chatting about earlier, where I said, you can make a console app, you can make a ASP.NET Core app, you can make any kind of app really in the .NET ecosystem other than Xamarin, and then you can just say .NET build and it works. But with Xamarin and having its dependency on Mono and having to use MS Build and having to know about things like signing certificates, provisioning profiles, the CI tools have always had to have like a special build your Xamarin iOS step or build your Xamarin Android step. And so all that should be simplified. Fingers crossed. Good questions. What else? All right. Well, let's actually, I didn't even scroll up in the meeting chat. Okay, cool. Yeah, let's jump into some .NET MAUI code. So feel free to jump in anytime while we're chatting about this. We'll try to keep it as interactive as possible while still being constructive and civil. But .NET MAUI, just like Xamarin, is also totally open source. So the code we're looking at today is just .NET/MAUI on GitHub. And yeah, all I did was I just cloned the main branch. I haven't even looked at, okay, so there's not too many branches going on. But highly recommend checking this out, even if you're not going to look at the source code yet, just because this is where you can get all the latest updates. So for example, the Xamarin team does the community stand-ups. I think they do them once a month. So here's last month's December's video, so you can see all the latest, greatest updates. And then they've got some links to some older ones. And then you can also see what's going on in the development. So where the spec is at, like, for example, I mentioned, well, I didn't really mention it. Let's scroll down here because I had it on a slide, but we didn't really talk about it. One of the other cool things with MAUI is you'll notice Windows here. Microsoft is going to make Windows a first-party framework on .NET MAUI. Now, there's still a little star there because we're going to leverage WinUI for it. And obviously, WinUI still hasn't been released yet, but kind of working parallel paths with WinUI to be able to provide .NET MAUI support for Windows. And then the other really cool thing to me is macOS. So right now, yes, Xamarin Forms technically supports macOS, just like it technically supports WPF. But if you've ever tried to build a macOS app or WPF app with Xamarin Forms, you'll run into some limitations pretty quickly, and that's because the work on Xamarin Forms to support things like Linux and macOS was all community supported. So the engineers were focused on iOS and Android. The Microsoft engineers, I should say, were focused on Microsoft. The Microsoft engineers were focused on iOS and Android, while accepting contributions for supporting Linux, macOS for Xamarin Forms. But coming with .NET MAUI, macOS and Windows will become first-class citizens. And the reason I bring this up is, there we go. As we're flipping through the README for the .NET MAUI repo, there's things like WinUI 3 Preview 3 support or Mac Catalyst support. So lots of really cool things coming. And I know for me, like I have a couple apps in the App Store, and some of the requests I get are, hey, this app, it looks like it's only available on iOS and Android. How do I run this on Windows? Or how do I run this on my Mac? And it's like, well, you don't. But with .NET MAUI, it should be really easy because we should just be able to compile and build for macOS or compile and build for Windows. So anyways, long story short, highly recommend coming in and checking out this repo. This is where you can find all the goodies. So as the months go on, as we get closer to November, you can see all the fun things that is coming. Now, there's the experimental Visual Studio Code support, all that fun stuff. So enough talking about it. Let's jump into the .NET MAUI source code. All right. So what I have here, actually, let me show you the solution first. Whoosh. So there's a couple things going on in here. There's still the Xamarin Forms project. So there's two parallel paths happening on .NET MAUI that the engineering teams are doing right now. The first one is implementing these handlers. So again, handlers in .NET MAUI are what we know or knew as renderers in Xamarin Forms. So basically, the engineering team has to first create all the .NET MAUI handlers. So how do you handle a button? How do you handle a label? How do you handle anything that we're familiar with in Xamarin Forms to be able to, in a platform-specific manner, show that on iOS, on Android, blah, blah, blah. So as that is being completed, as we have support for, say, a button handler, then the team can go into the Xamarin Forms code and rip out the old renderers and replace them with the new and improved handlers. So one of the, maybe, I was going to say benefit. It's not really a benefit, but one of the interesting things is that there's still the old Xamarin Forms source code in the .NET MAUI repo as the team slowly chips away at it and makes this transition. And so what I wanted to start with was, what are renderers? So if you've never created a custom renderer in your life, let's take a look at them. So what we're looking at here, this is a label renderer. This is how Xamarin Forms creates a label. So when you tell Xamarin Forms, I want to create a new label, one of the first methods that fires is onElementChanged. And what Xamarin Forms does, it looks to see, well, the element can change, meaning it already existed, and then we edited a property, or maybe we reinitialized it. And so that's why we get the old element, the new element as these values. But really, it's this control value. The control value is the native control. So that's our UI label or our Android label, or was it Android text box? Blanking on the API. But this is what Xamarin Forms does. So when you say new label, it subscribes to this property changing event. It says if the control previously was null, then we need to create that native control. And then it marches through all these methods like update line break mode. Like, what's that look like? Look at this, update line break mode. So if you set your line break to be tail truncation, then it sets that value. And it runs through all these different methods that essentially align to every property we can change on our label. So we could have horizontal text alignment, and it runs through that and how to do that on the native platform. So don't worry too much about this, other than if you're looking at this for the first time and you're saying, wow, that seems like a mess. You're right. Because it is. Like, Xamarin Forms was never, or wasn't originally designed to be what it is today. It was originally designed just to be kind of a prototyping framework that you could kind of crank out a quick and dirty UI, show it to your stakeholders, and then you would jump back into like iOS storyboards and Android XML files or Android Designer and build your UI like we used to do back in the old days. But Xamarin Forms kind of took off. The community loved it. I love it. And it became a just amazing way to make cross-platform apps. But we're also stuck with this kind of clanky old architecture. The other thing that's really silly when you look at it now, great idea in the time. I think back in 2014 when we first created Xamarin Forms. I used to work at Xamarin back in the day, by the way. So apologize if you catch me saying we. But something like this, where maybe you've already created this label, but you've changed its text color, specifically the properties. So that means a binding is fired, the text color is changed. Every time something on that element changes, this method fires. So if you change the text color, this method's going to fire. If you change the text, I mean, how many times do we have a view model updating our labels text as the user's typing or anything like that? This method fires. This method fires so many times. And look at it. It's just a bunch of if-else statements. Not great code to read, not great code to maintain, not the most performant code in the world. But I will say one benefit of .NET is that the compiler is smart enough to make performance improvements for us. So if you actually look at the compiled code, once you get past a certain number of if-else statements, the C# compiler actually will turn that into a switch. So it's faster, performs faster. And then if you have enough, and I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but yeah, if you have enough if-else blocks, the compiler will then turn that into a dictionary. So it's a hashed value. So you have O1 lookup times. But yeah, this is how Xamarin Forms works today. So what are we doing? In .NET MAUI, we will have handlers. So let's first check out. Let's go to core first. So the first thing you'll notice is everything in .NET MAUI is an interface. And this is going to be awesome because one of the things that's really painful with Xamarin Forms is if you want to do something, like if you want to handle this horizontal text alignment property every time it changes, then you have to come in here and override on element property changed. Or maybe you just want to do something simple where you always want this text to be, I don't know, a specific font, or you want to do something crazy. You would have to override on element changed. And this it also makes for a bad developer experience, because now developers have to know that this method on element changed exists. And they have to know every time I create a label renderer, I override on element changed. But when I do a page renderer, there is no on element change. So the other problem with Xamarin Forms is it's kind of a mess. It's not very structured. It's not very opinionated. So with .NET MAUI, everything's going to be an interface. So if we check out the iLabel interface, looks like we haven't added too much to it, but it inherits from the iText interface. And let's see, there we go. So iText, if you want to have anything that displays text, because a label can display text, an entry can display text, an editor can display text, heck, a button can display text, then you just have to inherit or implement iText. And then that's where you're required to have all these properties. So string text, the color, font. And then you can keep going down the rabbit hole. Like this inherits from, or I guess interfaces implement, classes inherit. So this interface implements iFont, and then which implements iView. So you just have this, I won't say rabbit hole, because rabbit hole is usually used in a derogatory way, but the best kind of rabbit hole possible, because it's all interfaces implementing interfaces. And what this all boils back up to the surface for, or to allow us to do, is if I go into these handlers, check out this label handler. So this is the future, right? Like if you ever felt the pain of a custom renderer, you're gonna love how these handlers work, because what we do now is instead of having weird methods like on property changed or on element changed that we override, and some renderers had it, some renderers didn't. What you can do now is you can just leverage this mapper, this property mapper. So think of a property mapper like a dictionary, and it just aligns that interface. So in this case, ilabel.color, and it maps it to a method. Now, I guess map color hasn't been completed yet. So again, still a work in progress. .NET is still being feverishly worked on by the engineers. But if we look at map text, this is the method that runs anytime the text on this label needs to change. And so on anytime the user changes the text, then we have a method that updates the text. And that's it. So if we want to change something, we don't have to write a completely new custom renderer. We can just replace this value, this ilabel.text value in our property mapper, and we can swap it out with our own custom implementation. And we don't have to worry about overriding methods or anything crazy like that. We can just use the power of dictionaries in this property mapper to do so. And what's cool about the code we're looking at is kind of circling back to the multi-targeted projects. So this, let's see if let's do it like this. There we go. So Xamarin.platform.handlers, this is its C# project. And you'll notice this is a multi-targeted library. So this project knows that it's targeting these versions of .NET Standard, Xamarin iOS, Mono Android, I was about to call it Xamarin Android. And so what we can do, because all of these targets are supported in this project, is we can take advantage of these if-defs up here. And so we can set the native view to be that platform specific code. So there's no service locator, dependency injection, inversion of control, whatever you want to call it, needed anymore. We can just say, if we're on iOS, that native view is going to be a UI label. So when we come down here, this handler.type native view, that's now a UI label. And we can just write some code to handle how a UI label updates our text. And if let's see, where is it in here? One of these folders, platform, iOS, there we go. So like under label extensions, update text is just an extension method on UI label. So you could say UI label.text equals text, or, if it's an NS attributed string, all that fun stuff. And all of this code is in the same project. So we didn't have to, there we go. So we didn't have to create a new iOS project. We didn't have to leave our current project to do anything specific. We could just do it all here in the same project. So hopefully that'll reduce a lot of that overhead and cognitive load that it takes to make custom renderers, that it takes to write platform-specific code, because we can all do it in the same project now if we use the multi-targeted projects. So I'll tell you what, let me pause here, because this is a big thing with .NET MAUI. So let's jump back to some questions, because this is essentially the engine running .NET MAUI, and I want to make sure everybody, or at least if we're not all on the exact same page, we're close enough to where you can go explore this code on your own. So let's see, what questions does everybody have? Oh, we already have some in the chat. Can you please paste the URL? Yes, I can absolutely paste those URLs. Let's see. So that comparison chart's just here in the README. And this should give you a direct link to it. So we'll say, here's the comparison chart. Oh, Matt Hall, you already beat me to it. Well, anyways, let's see. So Mark asked, what version of C# will .NET 6 or MAUI support? So I assume when you say version of C#, Mark, you're talking about how right now we're on C# 9. And with .NET 6 comes out, then we'll iterate. That'll be bumped up to C# 10. And that includes, and I should say also, it includes all the previous versions of C#. So you're not locked into C# 10. Well, I guess that doesn't make sense because, yeah, C# 10 implements all the C# 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 features. But yeah, so basically the version of C#, at least as of today, and the plan going forward is to increment that every year. So just like we're moving from .NET 5 to .NET 6 this year, we'll be moving from C# 9 to C# 10. But that's at least the plan as of today. Who knows what things will look like in 5-10 years. But I do also want to point out, Mark, you can use C# 9 in your Xamarin apps today. So you're not necessarily limited to older versions of C# just because you're on Xamarin. There's a difference between the language and the runtime. So if a feature is new in the runtime, then we can't use it until we upgrade our .NET or our .NET SDK. But if a feature is just language specific, so for example, things like what's something kind of recent? Oh shoot, what are the fancy names for it? Like that null checker, right? So like if I say,
oh, like null coalescing and wait, it's not null coalescing. There's a new one that's I don't remember. It's called
nullable reference types.
Yeah, but it was a
nullable reference types. Like a good one. Yeah,
like a null overriding. I'm trying to remember. I just saw it because I was doing. Remember the App Center issue? So I was looking into these things. I was like, oh yeah, that's what that's called. So anyway.
So anyways, yeah. The C# language and the C# runtime aren't necessarily tightly coupled anymore. Because a lot of things like this, if you look at how the compiler handles it, like basically this is just syntactic sugar that just looks pretty. The compiler just compiles it back down to, like if you look at the compiled code, it'll say something like if temp equals null, then temp equals new object. So it's just, we call it syntactic sugar. It just looks prettier for the developer. The compiler actually turns it back down into this. So it's not really a runtime dependency on it. It's just language. But anyways, .NET MAUI handlers. What questions do we have on .NET MAUI handlers?
Hey, is there going to be guidelines for submitting your own, just as part of the open source aspect of .NET MAUI? Are there going to be guides for how to build your own handlers?
Oh, good question. I'm not sure what the team has planned for documentation. I certainly know that they do have plans for documentation, but
my dog found a boy, so that's what I'm doing.
No worries. I mean, my philosophy is I always look to see how the Xamarin team does it. So anytime, like for example, I went to create a button handler, I would always jump into the Xamarin Forms source or button renderer. Dang it. I would jump into the Xamarin Forms source code to see like, okay, how does the Xamarin Forms team create a button using their renderers? And so I would imagine that their recommendations are going to be pretty close to what we see here, like having this property mapper, using the name of property for the interface and mapping that to a method. If nothing else, like it's just a really clean way of doing it. We don't have these crazy if-else blocks. The engine underneath kind of can handle all those if else and property changing and all that crazy code that we saw here. So like, how much nicer is this, right?
Nice. I don't know if you covered it, Brandon. I know earlier I had to run an errand. Earlier you were saying MAUI's really where, and the Xamarin Forms like approach is how Microsoft's taking UI across their ecosystem, which I was hoping they would. So I'm very excited to hear that. Is that love going to come to the Windows side of things? So is that what MAUI's going to address, or is it going to be MAUI and WinForms, or is WinForms going to be rolled into MAUI so it's all MAUI all the time, and WinForms is just another thing along with Xamarin Forms, Comet, mobile Blazor bindings, Uno possibly, and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, so
is that what
the short answer to your question is WinUI.
Okay.
Basically, WinUI will be the way that .NET MAUI handles going through renderers, handlers. The way that .NET MAUI handles the implementation for Windows. And I will say I'm not a WinUI expert, but I think WinUI is basically the cross-platform tool between WPF and WinForms, right? Maybe UWP too.
Yeah, I thought WinUI was effectively WinForms. So unless I'm mixing WinForms, because there was like WinUI something, and then that was separate from MAUI and UWP and Xamarin Forms and that whole approach. I'm blanking on the exact terms, but I thought they were separate. I was hoping that they would be combined into one when MAUI came out.
Gotcha. I mean,
because WinUI 3 was part of the .NET 5 rollout, right?
Yeah, the first preview was already out there. So, I mean, part of the thing was WinUI started development before .NET MAUI. And so
yeah, there is
part of it's like
Forms, MFC, and gotcha.
Every kind of Windows app. So yeah, I mean, the plan right now is because WinUI is already a thing. It seems silly for .NET MAUI to reinvent the wheel. So it's like, hey, let's just leverage this. Oh, here we go. We got a nice little chart here too. Right. So yeah, like for now, let's leverage WinUI. Maybe there's a convergence a couple years down the road where there's enough overlap where one absorbs the other. But obviously, I'm just speculating. I'm not going to make any bold statements about this like that.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. I thought it would be. I think the goal was to get like a common namespace for all of this. So that's what I was hoping for. That's all. Really, just conjecture on my part.
But yeah, I mean, the nice thing with it's like as .NET MAUI grows and kind of takes over, it can totally be a thing where, we're obviously very focused on mobile. I mean, I used to work at Xamarin. This is Xamarin Meetup. Hopefully we all love Xamarin. But with .NET MAUI, you can. My hope for it is one day you just write .NET MAUI code. So it doesn't matter. Are you targeting iOS? Are you targeting Android? Are you doing something on the web? Are you doing something on desktop? One day it'll just be, I'm just writing my UI in .NET MAUI. Like that is the UI code. And then it just runs on whatever platform you're targeting. But obviously there's still a lot of work to be done. Like even you'll notice there's no mention of the web here on this chart. At least I don't think so. I'm scrolling through. Okay. So could we bring .NET MAUI to make it cross-platform for mobile, desktop, and web? I mean, in theory, yeah, that should be possible. But at least for the first iteration with .NET 6 just being right around the corner, we do want to focus on iOS, on Android, so that kind of parity with Xamarin Forms. And then we'll be leveraging things like Catalyst to bring macOS support, things like WinUI to bring it to Windows. And yeah, I mean, I would love .MAUI to run in the browser too someday, because then that's just less code for us, right?
Yeah. Or just do the mobile Blazor bindings and you get to keep your Blazor.
Also that. So yeah, speaking of Blazor down here. Whoop.
Noise.
Yeah, good question. What else? Let's see if nothing in the chat.
Well, thanks for sharing those charts.
No problem. Danny.
With the CLI and build tools being changed, you mentioned VS Code will now be able to do a lot of the things that we were only able to do in Visual Studio. Will Visual Studio still be like, at what point will the main Visual Studio support MAUI, or is 2019, will that support it, out of the gate, or do we have to wait for 2021 to come out?
That is a good question.
I would think it's part of a VS update,
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. There will definitely be a Visual Studio there we go. Visual Studio 2019. Boom.
Oh yeah,
so
there it is.
So yeah, I imagine there will just be an update that comes out for Visual Studio, kind of like when .NET 5 came out this year. You'll just update and should get it all. But no, yeah, really good question. And again, with Visual Studio Code, you'll see like it says experimental *****. I wouldn't bet on using Visual Studio Code as my main development environment for .NET for Xamarin apps this year. Maybe next year in .NET 7, we can get some more plugins and extensions. Who knows? But it's one of those things it's on the to-do list. We're slowly improving it, and a lot of those improvements and benefits kind of are what fall out of the work we're doing with combining Mono and .NET and combining like the MS build tools inside of the .NET build tools. So yeah, looks like Visual Studio 2019, .NET MAUI.
And one other question, with the single project, how are like all the Android manifest settings set and the iOS, like all the permissions and all the platform specific version name and code, is that all under like that one project's properties, or how do you go about setting all those?
Good question, man. So this is something that's still being worked on, and I don't think the team's come to that final solution. So the good news is, if you have any ideas on the .NET MAUI repo, you can start a discussion. But like, this was the first thought, or one of the first ideas was you just have a resources folder. There's already tools out there that allow you to create or drop a font like this TTF file or an OTF file. You can already drop a font into your .NET Standard project, and there's tools in Xamarin Forms that'll allow that to be handled in a cross-platform manner. So we've already kind of cracked the code on fonts. Images have was it Resizetizer? Let's see if I can spell this right. Yeah. So there's a cool tool available called Resizetizer. Ooh, did it move? Check out the blog post. Okay.
Yeah, you want
so
the
Resizetizer NT. But same idea as the fonts. Oh, sorry. I heard somebody talking about it. I didn't hear what you said.
Yeah, sorry. Just yeah, the NT is for new technology, like it says on there.
Nah,
I thought that was pretty funny.
Windows NT.
Funny.
But yeah, with Resizetizer, this is kind of what the team's playing around with internally to see is this a valid solution for this part right here, like, let's just drop an image in, and then the technology that we're using in the Resizetizer can make those the platform specific sizes, right? So like your 1x, 2x, 3x, your HDPI, XHDPI, XXX HDPI, blah, blah, blah. So I guess the only thing I could say is stay tuned. I'm curious about how that's going to land as well. Because to me, that was always the biggest blocker was, yeah, like, how do you handle that Android manifest? How do you handle the info plist? Do you have folders like this, like a platform specific folder inside of the project, and then the compiler knows that that's only for iOS? We'll find out. We'll see what the team comes up with, but I know they are iterating on this. So if you have ideas, you can head to, where did we go? So back up here. I mean, obviously you can open a pull request if you've already solved that problem, but you can also just open up a discussion. So these are good places to ask questions. And I wonder, let's try Android Manifest. Maybe there's some discussion already going on. MAUI single project. This could be where all that work's going on. Okay, yep, exactly. All right, so right here. That was opened in May. Scroll down to the bottom. We got some I agrees. Glad I found this issue. I don't know. We'll have to, I don't want to read through this with everybody together, but yeah, it looks like we can check this out. And I'll tell you what, let me drop this link in our chat here. Let's say, here's the discussion on, what are they calling it? We'll use the right verbiage. Well, I don't know what to call it. We'll say using things like Android manifest in a multi-targeted project. But yeah, that's a tough one.
Configuration and settings. Your plist, your app manifest, your package dot something X. I don't remember what the UW is.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right. Do you have any other questions?
Cool. So we do have a little bit of time. I wanted to show off MVU, just kind of raise awareness. Like I said, the .NET world hasn't really adopted MVU much. Meanwhile, all the other communities are way far past this. And so one of the things I see looking at my crystal ball is that MVU is probably the future if everybody's already doing it in the other communities. And I do like what I see with it. So what I want to show you first was, this is a video. Let's see. Maybe we'll just pull it up on YouTube. And then, all right, got 1080. There we go.
Can you put the YouTube link in the chat too, please?
Yeah, so all of these are linked on the URL we shared at the beginning. So,
or that.
Let's I'll bring that in as well. So this is that landing page I put together for us today. So this is where you can see, I'm glad I brought this up. So we're talking about Comet right now, but quick aside, highly recommend a couple of these videos talk about .NET MAUI. This deep dive with James Clancy, he's one of the engineers at Microsoft, along with Sweeky, another engineer. This is where I learned a lot about .NET MAUI and these handlers versus renderers and all that fun stuff. So yeah, pop this video on. I think it's a long one, but I think I watched it. Yeah, so it's 2 hours. I just cranked up the playback speed to 3x or 2x, and you can jam through it, but highly recommend it. All right, back to MVU. So check out how this app's being written here. The first thing you'll notice, C# hot reload already working. So all this code's being written in C#. You can see how it's kind of nested together, very fluent syntax. So you can say like dot font size, and we can see all this updating here as we go, which is really exciting. None of this really has anything to do with MVU yet. This is just kind of a new way to write UI in Xamarin Forms. But let's see. I think we zoom out at the end. No, it doesn't show that part of the code. That's okay, because it was there at the beginning. And also, I have some code that I can share with you. But like you'll see, you know what? Cool video. Actually, let's let's look at some real code. And again, this app is open source, the code we're about to look at, and I've linked it on that website so you can check it out. But this is just a geolocation app that I made using Comet. And again, Comet, you can think of it like Xamarin Forms. It's a cross-platform framework, but it's focused on using model view update instead of model view model. And let's see, while that app's building, who knows how long it'll take to compile, we'll show off some code. So the way MVU works is you have a view that gets generated as a function. So this body attribute is for this method called generate body, and kind of similar to that video we saw, this creates a V stack, so a vertical stack, and in there we've placed some titles and some labels, and then we've told it, fill horizontal, so it's all centered in the screen, and we'll see what the app looks like in, I don't know, a couple minutes once we're done compiling. But what happens is this is the code to generate the view. Let's bring this back up. There we go. So the view gets generated by a function, and anytime the model updates, whoops, sliding all over the place. Anytime the model updates, then we rerun this function and completely update the view. So in this case, the model is our state. So we have this state object, and this is just a quick and dirty app that shows you your location. So your altitude, your latitude, your longitude, lets you know how accurate the GPS is. And so I'm just using Xamarin Essentials. Like, this is just the Xamarin Essentials location object. But basically, the way this app works is anytime, boom, there it is. So anytime your state changes, and in this case, it's the location, we regenerate the view. And the way I've made this app is I just have this while loop down here. And this while loop just uses the Xamarin Essentials location services to get your current location. And then it pauses for a second. So every second, we're updating the location state dot value. So every time the value changes, we update the UI. And so this generate body method runs, and we update everything on the screen. Now, if you're like me, you're probably looking at this and going, wow, that is a really bad way of doing everything, because we're just generating new objects every time. There's going to be memory, like tons of garbage collection. It's not very performant. We're probably just going to be flickering in the UI because it's updating all the time, or being redrawn all the time. At least that's what I said when I first heard about MVU, because it's like, there's no way that we can do this, right? Well, again, turns out mobile developers are already doing that for React apps, for Flutter apps, and our phones nowadays are powerful enough to, they can redraw the UI, and there's no flicker, there's no performance problems. I mean, arguably, because Flutter doesn't use the native controls, Flutter, if you've never played around with Flutter, it's just a blank canvas, and it uses a tool like Skia to just draw the UI on. So it's all fake. I mean, it looks, and you can just make it look like the normal UI, but it's not actually using a UI label or a UI button or any of the native iOS or Android UIs. It's just painting it on the screen. But yeah, Flutter's just redrawing that UI every time, and our phones are powerful enough where that works. So what's really cool with model view update is you lose a lot of the unnecessary overhead that comes with MVVM. MVVM, you have your view model, but every property that you want to update has to go into your view model. That property is a field. You have to call onProperty changed every time. That view model, those view model properties end up usually just mimicking your model. So you almost kind of like recreate your model in the view model. There's a lot of overhead to MVVM that just goes away. Like you'll notice there's no iNotify property changed anywhere on the screen. I didn't have to duplicate this location object and break out all of its properties. So lots of benefits there. So we can write code more quickly. And then, like I mentioned earlier with GraphQL, your state, your model could actually be a GraphQL backend that's just sending updates to your UI. So I'm a big fan of GraphQL, and I hope that there's a future someday where this starts to become just the de facto recommended approach for our Xamarin apps, where the Xamarin app itself is almost just kind of a dumb UI interface that uses MVU and is just listening to our GraphQL backend to get updates anytime something is changed. So, I kind of picture something like Twitter, right? Like anytime somebody posts a new tweet, GraphQL backend sends that as an update using sockets, which is all stuff that's already built into GraphQL. Our MVU app gets that, and then the UI just updates. So the UI, there's like no backend code or anything like that in our mobile apps because we can do it all in our GraphQL backend. Obviously, that's that is super idealistic, is we'll want to have some logic on the phone just in case there's no internet connection. But this is what model view update looks like. Obviously, there's way more to it, but this isn't a model view update talk. I just wanted to promote it a little bit because I'm a big fan. But right, so you have a model, which is the state object, and then every time it updates, so every time we update its value, we rerun this generate body function. And yes, there is some diffing going on. So if I'm moving around with this app on the phone and my lat long changes because maybe I'm driving, but my altitude doesn't because I'm not flying, Comet is smart enough to do a quick diff and say, okay, this title didn't change, the altitude didn't change, the accuracy didn't change, only lat long did, and it will only update and redraw those properties. So there's some really cool things to look for. Comet's available today as a NuGet package. Boop, there we go. And the plan is to make this an experimental framework in the Microsoft ecosystem. So kind of like how Mobile Blazor Bindings is an experimental framework that exists today. So will Comet, and kind of this move to .NET MAUI, where Comet doesn't have to reinvent the wheel. It can just leverage all the handlers and interfaces in .NET MAUI. Then it's just another UI framework that can run on top of .NET MAUI, just kind of like Xamarin Forms will be and all that fun stuff. So let's see. We just hit the top of the hour, so happy to stick around, answer any more questions everybody has. But if you're not interested in C# and MVU and Comet, I totally get it. But check it out. It might be the future one day. I hope it becomes the future. But here's all the resources. So all the code we've looked at today, like the .NET MAUI source code, it's all open source. This little MVU sample app I have here, this is all open source. We've got links to Comet. We've got links to all the information about .NET MAUI and videos from Build and Ignite. Check them out, codetraveler.io/Indy-MAUI. And thanks everybody for coming.
Thanks, Brandon. That was awesome. Thank you very much. Sweet. Just for everyone's edification, I'm going to stop recording here in a moment. The recording should be available here in the next few days on the Indy Xamarin Meetup site. So just go look that up. Just look for the specific Meetup event, and then I usually put it in the comments. So that's how you find it. For those of you wondering how to find it, that's where you find it.